Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Thank you all for being here to the ritual crucifixion of the library director. Well, I mean, after all, I deserve it, right? You know, thank you. Blinded by rage as I am, I'm here to present one side. It is true. It is a particular side will be presented here tonight. I do want to mention a couple of upcoming programs before I go into my defense before the jury, and mention some things that we're doing at the end of this month and next month. Tomorrow night, we have a very special program, and I hope those of you who are interested in debate and dialogue, and I assume most of you are if you're here tonight, we have a great program. Alvin Sykes, some of you will have been to, we've had a couple of programs with Alvin before. Alvin is a man who had only an 8th grade education, was a musician, and spent a lot of time. He said he graduated from the 8th grade and transferred to the public library. For the work he did in the public library, Kansas City, Kansas Public Library and the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library, he worked on a case of a man who had been murdered, who was his friend, Steve Harvey, murdered at Liberty Memorial. It was a hate crime. And the man had been acquitted who had killed Steve Harvey. And Alvin thought it was a great injustice, and he came to the Kansas City Public Library and he went into the statutes, the civil rights statutes, and this is one of the first times this was done. And he found the civil rights statute that said you could be prosecuted, get around the double jeopardy question. You could be prosecuted for violation of civil rights if it was a federal facility or a person was engaged in activities related to that. And the guy who killed Steve Harvey was prosecuted. This is in the 1990s. It happened in 1980, but it was in the 1990s, I believe, and he's still in jail. He was convicted and he's still in jail. And that set Alvin on a career of looking at civil rights cold cases and working with people around the country, including especially the Emmett Till family. Some of you will know the Emmett Till case, the last person, we hope, to be lynched in America, a young man. And Alvin's worked with them. And out of that came the Till Bill, which created the cold case section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. And there was one man who held up that bill. It was going to be passed in the House and the Senate. And it was Senator Tom Coburn, a Republican from Oklahoma, who was very conservative, very fiscally conservative. And there was a rule in the Senate that said you had to find money somewhere else in the budget if you were going to add something to the budget at that point. I think they've gotten rid of that lately, Alvin went to Tom Coburn's office and sat in, basically, in his office until Senator Coburn would see him. And the end result of that is that Senator Coburn had a conversion experience because of Alvin's intensity, warmth, and commitment. And the bill passed, and we now have the cold case section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. So Alvin Sykes, civil rights crusader, 8th grade education, did his work in the Kansas City Public Library. Tom Coburn, very conservative, fiscally conservative Republican from Oklahoma, who retired in January, will be here tomorrow night and talk about their friendship and talk about how they did this together and talk about the power of dialogue, something that we may be in need of tonight. So I'd urge you to come to that and hear our conversation I'll have with the two of them. Also, a different kind of dialogue you might be interested in. On Tuesday, July 28th, here at Central, we've got the author of the book Buckley and Mailer, The Difficult Friendship That Shaped the 60s, about Bill Buckley and Norman Mailer. As I say, a different kind of dialogue. And we have our new calendar out on what's going to happen in August, and you should take a look at that. I will mention only one thing about that. And a friend of the library, a great friend of the library, Don Scott, will be talking about his memoir, about his life. He's a retired brigadier general of the U.S. Army who was the chief operating officer of the Library of Congress. He's been very active in local history stuff since he moved to Kansas City. He lives in Kansas City now. Don Scott's a great guy, an American hero, I think. So, tonight, there's been some controversy about the hotel. Hayward Sanders reminded me tonight that the first time I talked to him about coming here this year was actually in October, when the hotel deal was only a gleam in the mayor's eye, in Mike Burke's eye. And I felt it was the right thing to do to bring Hayward Sanders here, because I believe, they challenged me on KMBZ this afternoon. I was on the radio. I believe he's the leading analyst of convention centers and convention center hotels in the United States. Now, he's come to a conclusion about that, which you might understand the conclusion from the title of his book, Convention Center Follies. But I think he's genuinely the most important analyst of this, and I thought it would be a great idea to have the most important analyst here. I thought the city council would welcome it. I knew the developers probably wouldn't welcome it. Secondly, I think there's also been a lot of ink about this in the Star and elsewhere in media. The Pitch has written about it. The Pitch has written a really good article, actually, about it. Steve Vachrod, who I think is here tonight. And I don't think that the other side, the developers, haven't been heard from. In fact, I think they got in first. I think they were able to stand up and tell us what they were going to do. The mayor, of course, is behind it. The city council is behind it. I think they've had their day. I think it's okay to present another side. Amen. Thank you. And of course, partly in response to the concerns of Steve Rose about my blinding rage, and Mike Burke, and both Steve Rose and Mike Burke, you should know, have been longtime friends of mine. I've known Mike for 35 years, and Steve has been a great close friend of my family, especially my father, and they're people I respect and admire, and I hope to be able to buy them a drink at the Hyatt. No, wait. They should buy me a drink. I'm sorry. And so, I don't want this to be personally contentious, though it's kind of gotten in that direction. And the third thing I want to say about this is, and I believe I represent not just the library, but it is the library we're talking about. It's not my personal agenda. Steve used that. It's been used by Mike. I don't believe this is my personal agenda. I believe this is the library's agenda. I believe this is the school district's agenda, the mental health board's agenda, the community colleges, and there's actually a long list. The blind pension. We could go through the long list of taxing jurisdictions that are affected by every TIF that happens in Kansas City. It is a redirection of money that otherwise would come to the taxing jurisdictions. The city has complete power over this. We do not. We sit on the commission, but we are a minority, and the mayoral appointees inevitably override us, as witnessed the fact that Debbie Siragusa, our representative who's back here, our CFO, voted. It was the one who voted in the 9-1 against the expansion of that. The 9-1 vote, Debbie, was that on the Stars? Or was that on this? The convention center, 9-1 on the convention center. I think the district didn't vote. So we're representing the interests of those institutions, and those institutions, the way we represent, or the importance of that is, you as taxpayers and voters have actually voted to us levies. You voted to the mental health, it's called the mental health levy. You voted to the library. You voted to the school district money. And most people in Kansas City do not understand that under the terms of a state law written by Mike White, who is a development lawyer, our former county executive, who is also a friend of mine and a friend of the library, and who's offered to exempt the library a couple of times, but I've said exempt the school district and the mental health, and then it doesn't happen. The most permissive law in the United States, okay? So we're defending your votes to send money to us. Be okay with us if we had a right to sit down with the city and had an equal vote with the city on how this money is dispensed, but we don't. So inevitably, we are overruled. And what's the result of that? The result of that is that Kansas City has more TIF than any other, one other city has more TIF than we do, and that's St. Louis. Our district, the Kansas City Public Library District and the Kansas City School District, have more TIF than any other taxing jurisdiction in the United States, more than any other taxing. Do you have a question, ma'am? Yes. Tax increment financing. Basically, what happens in the hotel is they'll build the hotel and they'll say that every tax that they would have paid, it's a $300 million building, every tax that they would have paid to us, to the city, to the school district, et cetera, will actually be diverted into the project itself. So they will use that money. In fact, so basic facts of this, basic facts that are elided in the Star's editorial, which mentioned $50 million. One of the editorials for the supporters, which mentioned $35 million. Actually, the total amount of money, these are city numbers. These are provided in the TIF and the but-for that the city has published. Total amount of money is somewhere between $160 million and $200 million in public dollars. Dollars would come to us, the school district, the city, the county, et cetera. But a substantial amount of money to us and the school district. And they're diverted into the project. It's the only way they can do the project. The but-for is true. They couldn't do this project without our money. Except it's also true with the but-for test that's rarely been mentioned. Lynn Horsley did write one article about this, all praise to her. There is actually a hotel. Interestingly enough, it is across the street from the site of the Hyatt Hotel, the new Convention Center Hotel. It's a Marriott, a residence inn, and a courtyard together. There are 260 rooms. It's almost topped out right now. You can go see it right now. Across the street, built without a single incentive from the city, without any money from the library, the school district. So the city's been doing a lot of this over the last 25 years. It's basically been about 25 years. And as I say, more of it's done in this city than in our district than anywhere else, and we're second only to St. Louis. The third largest city with TIF is Chicago, which is about 50% less than we are. And the only thing the teachers and Rahm Emanuel agree on in Chicago is that they need to restrict TIF. Unfortunately, our mayor, we haven't enlisted the teachers yet, we're working on that. So I think it's appropriate for the library to have another voice in this, to look at what actually happens around the country. But I will tell you one thing that happens in Kansas City, and we're going to have a packet that we'll pass out, which includes Mike Burke's comments about this, and the one criticism that he alluded to of Haywood Sanders from a consultant, a paid consultant. We want all voices to be heard and lots of information to be out about this. So we're going to give you a packet at the end of the evening that gives you a lot of information about this. But I want to tell you about one thing that I think is really interesting. So we've been doing this TIF for 25 years. 21% of our commercial property is abated or diverted in Kansas City. And that's a huge number. And what is the result of that? We have a lot of real estate. And the city will point to that real estate and the various companies that have benefited from the real estate, the headquarters, Sprint or Cerner or whatever it is. But here's an interesting thing, and we're going to give you this before you leave. The City Observatory of Portland, it's a young think tank in Portland, and the Civic Council and the city in some ways are modeling us on Portland. They've done a study of central business district job growth since the beginning of the recession over the last 8 years. 100 largest cities, and Kansas City comes in next to last. Of the 100 largest cities, job growth were next to last. Las Vegas is last, and Las Vegas is unique because they had huge growth in the 90s and the early 2000s. So we have the largest amount of TIF in the central business district of any city, the largest amount of corporate tax support, and we have the lowest job growth. So the question I leave you with about that is it working? Apparently not. So I don't want to throw my opinions out anymore, but I'm happy at the Milwaukee Deli over a glass of wine later to give you more of my opinions about this. But I feel it's right that we present Haywood Sanders here tonight. As I said, I first started talking to Haywood. I read some of his stuff. I read his book. Read the chapter about St. Louis in this book. It will curl your hair. I thought it was appropriate to bring him because he is the leading student. And what we really need is a history of what's gone on in convention centers and convention center hotels. But let me just mention one thing that we have not discussed in the Star or elsewhere, which is our own little history with convention centers and convention center hotels. I said in my letter to the Star, which they were originally going to print as an As I See It, as an op-ed, but then they printed next to Mike's letter too. I pointed out that I have a history with this, in that my father and Irv Hockaday and others raised money, that we actually contributed private money to the Marriott. What's now the Marriott was then the Vista Hotel, and they knew they were going to lose all the money, as the taxing jurisdictions will probably lose. We're the replacement for that in this deal. They knew they were going to lose the money, but they thought it was the right thing to do. We did need a convention center hotel. But from the library's point of view, in the school district, et cetera, here's the result. Debbie and I looked last night at, on the city's website, you can find what the Marriott pays in taxes. They actually pay a fair amount in taxes today. 30 years later, they pay a fair amount in taxes, but it all goes into a TIF. $475,000, and almost all of it goes into a TIF. That's how we get those nice lights on the Marriott that blink on and off, you can see. That's what they do with the money, and the endless redos of Barney Alice Plaza, the most unused public park in America. And that's what they do with the money, and what they pay to the library 30 years later, the most important hotel in Kansas City, Convention Center Hotel, $929 to the library, $4,000 to the school district, et cetera, $430,000 to the city, which controls it as a TIF, the city TIF. So that's what will happen with the Convention Center Hotel we're talking about. That's an exact analogy to what will happen. So I invited Haywood to come here. Two things to note about this. Happy to have questions and even statements, as long as they're relatively short and to the point statements at the end. I think we want to have a full and fair discussion. That's what the library is all about. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a dialogue. Jan Markison, who is the chairman of the Finance and Audit Committee of the city, and a supporter of the hotel, will, I believe, be here. She told me she would be here. I invited other people from the city. The mayor couldn't come. We'll see who else shows up. I believe that a couple of the future members of the city council maybe are here tonight and will be here tomorrow. We have a new city council coming in August 1st. That's one reason I think you're seeing the hotel deal being voted on tomorrow, so it's before the new councilors come in. And we want to have a dialogue. I'm happy to have other views tonight and tomorrow. That's what the library is all about, is many views, many voices. We're a democratic with a small d institution. Dave Helling actually has a blog today in which he says we're a socialist institution, which is interesting, but that's another story. So tonight we have Haywood Sanders. Haywood Sanders is a professor at the University of Texas. He's written the important book, maybe the only book actually, but the important book about convention centers and convention center hotels and about the history of this in the United States, which is an amazing story over the last 30 years. It's a lot of lemmings rushing to the same cliff. And he is the leading expert. He's an expert on urban development at the University of Texas. He's written, we'll have that for you before you go, the Brookings Institution report on convention centers, and has been cited over and over again by the people who've been writing about this in places like City Lab or governing.com, the people who take these questions seriously. So it's a pleasure for me tonight. I apologize for going on at length, but I do feel that what I said is necessary. It is a pleasure for me to introduce you to Professor Haywood Sanders.
Thanks, Crosby. Thanks. Well, thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure, I think, to be here. I like to warn folks, university professors are kind of programmed at birth to speak in 50-minute increments. And I'm not going to swear this is the most interesting stuff on the face of the earth. So let me try and move it along and do what I can to provide some information. And if you want to stick around, I'm pleased to deal with questions. Just a tiny bit of preference, because there are folks call me lots of names and accuse me of lots of different things. In the book and tonight and in general, I go to some serious lengths to make sure that what I share with folks is as substantial and substantiated and documented as I can. You know, and if any of you have any questions about the data that I'm going to present, or the sources, or where it comes from, I'm pleased to give you as full an answer and support for that as I can. All I can do is share with you what I view as real, true, relevant information about this. And I always try and be very careful, whether it's to my students or tonight to you all. If you ask my opinion, I'm pleased to venture it, but let me make clear that it's my opinion, and that's different from the kind of facts that I want to share with you tonight. So with that, and assuming switching to the library computer instead of mine and doing a quick edit on this that all works well, let's go. And as Crosby mentioned, Convention Center Follies was published by the University of Pennsylvania Press just last summer. It is, I see a couple of you may have it, it is a pretty hefty tome as those things go, and not a lot of pretty pictures. But there's a lot of stuff in there. The cover is from Atlanta, and so there is a pretty extensive case study of Atlanta that goes along with the St. Louis one that Crosby mentioned a few moments ago. And we'll talk a little bit about Atlanta and lots of other places here. So if you're ready, we ready? Ready. Okay, let's roll. First, I want to start by talking about the national market environment. The blue line there comes from the industry, the Center for Exhibition Industry Research. That is their index of attendance based on their own sample of about 400 convention and trade show events around the country. It's their numbers. I do not vouch for them, but the consultants use them all the time. You'll see in the piece that I think Crosby shared with you from one of the consultants, that same blue line. For attendance, that's people who are attending these exhibition events. What they don't show you often is the red line. And the red line is the stock of convention center exhibit hall space in this country. And you'll note a distinct divergence in the last 14 years between those two lines. Okay? We've been building convention center space in this country like crazy, and we're continuing. The governor of Massachusetts just put $1 billion expansion of the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center on hold, but they're still expanding in Seattle. They're still expanding in Los Angeles. They're still expanding in Anaheim. They plan, though it's temporarily halted, an expansion in San Diego. There's a renovation and expansion in Miami Beach. So this is by no means done. So what is, now, I did this, okay? These are my slides, my charts. But just so you see that it's not just me, from Robin Hunden, in a report he did last year for the city of Fort Worth. That red line is square feet of paid exhibit space. That's his measure of demand. The green line with the little blue dots, that's exhibit hall space, and that language is here. The gap in supply and demand indexes is far apart in favor of event planners than at any time since 1987. That's what the market is for convention centers these days. There's a glut. There's an oversupply. And that's not just me telling you. That's the consensus. But the problem with those two lines and those charts is it's just big national data. And in this case, national data on the demand side that comes from the industry. So what I'd like to do is show you what happens in real convention centers in real cities. This is the convention and trade show attendance at McCormick Place, the nation's biggest convention center in Chicago. The Kansas City Center has circa 434,000 square feet of exhibit hall space. They've got 2.7 million in Chicago. You see that line in 2007? They added another 470,000. They added a convention center hall as bigger, slightly bigger than yours. I want you to see what happened. Now somebody, oh, that's just Chicago. Who wants to go to Chicago? Okay. But, so what, I'm sorry, could you share with me, what's your conclusion about how the convention business is at McCormick Place? Not good. Not good. Not my words. Okay. So what do you do when faced with not good convention business? No. You hire a consultant. Okay. And you know what this is Mr. Hazinski from HVS, the author of that review thing. And you know what they recommend? And they're busy building a fully publicly financed and owned 1,200-room hotel that will carry a Marriott brand right next door to that convention center. And they know, because HVS told them, that once they add that hotel, and by the way, they're building an event center, which is an arena for DePaul men's basketball next door too. Once that happens, look what's going to come. Lots more people, right? And they know that because the HVS consultant told them. But right, Chicago, bad example. So let's do Atlanta. Okay? How's the convention business in Atlanta these days? It's down. It is. It's seriously down. You'll note they did a major expansion. They did that expansion on the advice of a consultant, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And PricewaterhouseCoopers projected that once that expansion opened, they would do 1.4 million annual convention and trade show attendees. How did PwC do? Not quite on the mark in this case. But the Georgia World Congress Center Authority is an entity of the state government. They view this as very important in Atlanta. So how's their convention center doing? Not well. So what do you do when a convention center isn't doing well? You hire a consultant. And you know what that consultant tells you? Build a hotel. So the Georgia World Congress Center Authority is in the process of finding a developer for an 800 to 1,200 room hotel, which will create and support new demand, because we know that they're ready to come to downtown Atlanta. But that's just Atlanta and Chicago. So let's do Las Vegas. Okay? And it's very neat because they did a big expansion of the Las Vegas Convention Center in 2002. They doubled the size of the Las Vegas Convention Center. They went from 1 million square feet to 2 million. How'd they do? For a little while. How they doing now? World's changed since the recession. Okay, so what do you do?
Hire a consultant.
And what's the consultant going to tell you to do? No, a global business district that includes a massive expansion of the convention center and more hotels. They tore down the Riviera Hotel and Casino to build this. So they plan to spend about $2 billion expanding in Las Vegas. Well, that's the national market reality, okay? Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the St. Louis story, if I might, that Crosby mentioned a little earlier. St. Louis built its original convention center. They named it after a mayor too. Mayor Bartle seems to have disappeared. But they named it after Al Cervantes originally in St. Louis, and then they elected a new mayor, Vince Shamel. Some of you may remember he ran for governor. In the early 80s, they elected a new mayor, and Mayor Shamel was a little concerned about how the center was doing. Brought in an old friend of him, an alderman named Bruce Summerin, to run it. And since they were concerned about the convention center, they called in a consultant. In this case, David Peterson of Laventhal and Horwath, who kind of started the convention center consulting business. And this is from June '84 of their operational analysis. How were they doing at the Cervantes in the mid-'80s? Well, excess capacity, expansion is not recommended. Well, hang on. Can you note the date? Yes. June '84. Well, the mayor really wanted to expand that convention center. And so he brought Laventhal back, and the lead Laventhal consultant wrote this letter addressed to the convention center director. Okay, can you all take a moment to peruse that? Okay, and if that's okay, we'll go on a little further in the letter. Just tell me and I'll slow up a little, if you're willing to bear with me. Okay? I wish the signature came out better. But you see who wrote that letter? Consultant. A very particular consultant in this case, Charlie Johnson. Now, does the name Charlie Johnson ring a bell to any of you? Okay. Would you just bear that name in mind for a little bit? Okay? That was, do you remember when that was?
85.
March of '85. And by November, Laventhal came back and said, what you need is to expand your convention center. But having lost a football team, they needed to make a case not just for the expansion of the convention center, but for a domed stadium. So, by August of '86, Laventhal was back with an analysis for a stadium plus convention center expansion. That said, a lot of new business. They will come. If you build that dome stadium, now the Edward Jones Dome, used to be the TWA Dome once upon a time. And they did that. They did that. The state ponied up half the cost of the dome, the city and county the other half. They got the dome, they did the convention center expansion. What do you need to do after you do the convention center expansion?
Build a hotel.
Did you note the date on that? They had a little trouble finding a developer for that 1,000-room hotel the consultant told them they needed. Finally, by 1999, they found a way to do it using TIFs, including a Missouri Super TIF, approved by the State Development Finance Board, and $98 million federal empowerment zone bond issue designed to create jobs for low-income people. We'll get there. And they got another consultant study. You will note this is by, the name has changed slightly, this is by HVS, the folks that are now HVS. And HVS said, once you build that hotel, what's going to happen? They will come. Big new increase in demand, and they did that based on an analysis by the St. Louis Convention and Visitor Commission, then headed by a guy named Bob Bedell. And Bob said, I mentioned this in the piece I did in the Star, Bob said, we'll double our business. We'll go from circa 400,000 annual convention and meeting room nights to circa 800,000. And they took an old hotel, actually two old hotels, and they built themselves the Renaissance Grand, 1,081 rooms right across the street from the convention center. So they're ready to go, okay? They're primed when this thing opens up entirely in 2003 to hit that demand that they knew this would create. And it's a very nice hotel. They fixed it up very nicely. I stayed there one night. The rooms are a little on the small side, so it's not my preference downtown. But I was in it. So what happened?
That's grim.
Yeah, it was grim. And what happens when the room night business that you're supposed to get doesn't come? Oh, they did. They hired a whole series of consultants. And they had the bondholders hired consultants. But you know, you hire consultants and it doesn't change that, doesn't change the line on that chart, and that's what happens. In 2009, the bondholders foreclosed on the hotel because the hotel had not been able to make enough. It was running in the red. It couldn't pay off its annual debt service. So the bondholders for some years weren't getting paid. They foreclosed in February of 2009. The hotel was finally sold. Its two pieces sold in two separate pieces. The big piece right there, the 917 room piece, sold for $26 million. The other suites part sold for $6 million. That's $98 million bond issue, okay, for a $240 million hotel that sold for $32 million. It's one hell of an investment. Oops. Okay. Now, Baltimore expanded its convention center in the late 1990s. We had a technical problem with the slides, so I had to take two out because they didn't copy properly. But they wanted more convention business at the Baltimore Convention business. So they hired a consultant, HVS, you're getting the drift here. And what did HVS tell them to do? Build a hotel. They issued the bonds to build a 757-room Hyatt-branded hotel. The hotel's debt service is backed by the hotel's net revenues, the hotel's taxes, and citywide hotel revenues. If that's not enough, because after St. Louis, Wall Street and the bond market got smart, that's the hotel. And it has a great view. The convention center's on the opposite side. Some of you may recognize this. That's Oriole Park at Camden Yards. If you stay in the hotel, I haven't been in that hotel. If you stay in the hotel, you get a great view of the ball games in the summer. So it's got a built-in competitive advantage, not for conventions, but for watching ball games. Okay? So how'd this one do? Those are the convention center's numbers. That's total convention, trade show, and meeting attendance. You see where the hotel opened? Made a big dent in their business, right? So what happens? It keeps losing business. The city considered selling it. They can't sell it because nobody would buy a hotel that doesn't make money. Actually, to be honest, the $5.6 million is a little overstated. The reporter at The Sun, who didn't talk to me, included some depreciation in there, and they didn't do the numbers quite right. But the performance is pretty mediocre. It's not coming anywhere close to the forecast by HVS. So what are they going to do? They have an underperforming convention center and hotel. Well, guess what? Here's the convention center, and this is the answer. Convention center expansion, brand new 18,000-seat arena, and a new 500-room hotel tower atop it. That's crazy. I'm sorry. The Greater Baltimore Committee, the city's business leadership organization, the equivalent of the Civic Council here, that's their plan. That's their graphic. They want to make this happen. The state has yet to do it. If you want to see the consultant report on this one, it's sitting on my laptop. Just ask. Okay? Shall we switch gears? I'm from San Antonio. I want to talk for a minute about San Antonio. It is rumored that people like to visit San Antonio for reasons I do not entirely understand, but it is rumored. We did a major expansion of our convention center in 2001, beginning in the late 80s. Like St. Louis, we heard that what we needed to have next door to our convention center was a 1,000-room hotel. We couldn't make it happen. The whole 90s. We kept trying to get a developer to build us a hotel. Related Companies out of New York was the developer at one point. They couldn't make the deal work. Finally, in the early 2000s, the city decided to do it itself, like St. Louis, using federal empowerment zone bonds to build a 1,000-room hotel that carries the Grand Hyatt name out front. That next to our Hemisphere Tower, that on the right in this slide is the 1,000-room Grand Hyatt, our official poor people employing hotel. They had a consultant study, HVS, absolutely. And that study said, this was the part of where we had the technical glitch, another piece of the technical glitch. That study said that hotel is going to boost the city's, no, going to boost the room nights, going to boost the convention business. Big boom, because what you need to have is a The conclusion is yours, okay? Oh, so what happens after you build the hotel? What happens after you build the hotel? You get a consultant pack. And they got CSL, Convention, Sports, and Leisure. Remember those guys too. Not too long, just remember those guys, CSL. Got them back, and what did they recommend? Another hotel. No, just did a hotel that isn't working. Expand the convention center. So what are we doing right now? $325 million convention center expansion. We're moving along. Is this okay? Are we? Okay. I'm going to go way back, okay, back to the Bartle days, and I'm going to start in the mid-1980s. I won't go back to the 70s. I'm going to start in the mid-1980s. Eli, are you still here? Okay. This is from the 86-87 marketing plan of the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Greater Kansas City. These are the numbers of meetings and room nights, both at the convention center and in hotels, okay, in Kansas City. Okay. Now you will note early on in the early 80s, it was at, can you see those far right numbers for room nights? It's a little, okay? You see those numbers, and then it dropped down a bit in 85. Okay, and these numbers come from the CVB. Okay, so what do you do when this kind of thing happens? You do an expansion. Okay. And what happens when you do an expansion? Things are going to, they're going to take off. Okay. Okay. And that was the expansion with the thingies that go up in the sky with the stuff, whatever it is, on top of them that bridged over the freeway. But you're not quite done. Because after you do that, you hire another consultant and, did you notice that, Crosby? CSL. And John Kotz came in and said, another expansion. And then John was saying, what you need in order to compete is a grand ballroom. And so, you voted the taxes and you got yourselves a grand ballroom. Ah, look who's back. Note the date. Okay. And if we peruse the report a little, they said all these interesting things are going on. There's the expansion and renovation that they had recommended, right? And what's that going to do? It's going to boost the room nights. And then there's the new Sprint Center Arena, and that's going to boost hotel demand. And oh, look what comes next. Power and Light District. And that's going to boost hotel demand, not necessarily convention demand, just boost hotel demand, okay? All right? And I've never met Rob Roberts, but I really appreciate this. Okay? This is from July, it's from 2 years ago, this time, okay? And from a series he did in the Business Journal, okay? And I'm going to, in a minute, we're going to go look a little bit about that, about what he said a little further down. And if you want to see the whole thing, just let me know. I'd be glad to give it to you. Charlie Johnson. It would be the same Charlie Johnson. And what's going to happen? It's going to boost room nights. Ballroom and expansion's going to boost room nights. Power and Light District's going to boost room nights, right? We know that. We know that because... No, because the consultants tell us we know that. Those are your numbers from the CVB. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. It's not 45 minutes. What's that?
What happened in 2001?
Yeah, it was relatively new, and what happened after, you know what happened in 2001. The events of 9/11 had an enormous impact on travel. They had an enormous impact on the convention business. What is striking in your case is, and we also know that the 2008 recession has had an enormous impact. But these are numbers through 2014. It's as up to date and as carefully sourced from Visit KC as I could manage. That's the Kansas City story. And you know what to me is interesting about that? And I'll leave this is opinion. This is my conclusion. Those numbers don't look terribly different from Chicago, from Atlanta, from Las Vegas. In fact, you know, this is the story of convention center development in this country. And that's all I have to share with you this evening. That's opinion. That's opinion.
So obviously, we've got a lot of questions. Are you willing to take questions?
Yeah, whatever
appreciate
you'd like to
anything
ask.
good in this case, I think, but keep them short to the point, not rambling. if possible.
Do you want to do the picking so nobody can accuse me of?
We'll start right here and we'll move back.
Well, let's suppose our fair city, like many fair cities, has a sows here. What can we do hired those particular people to make, if not a silk purse, at least a nice salary.
Well, let me, there's a simple, if somewhat peculiar answer. And I'll give you the simple answer first, and then the peculiar one, and then the more reasonably elaborated one. The simple answer is don't do what everybody else is doing. Amen. Okay? Period. You know, don't think, there's an old saying that goes along those lines. Don't think if you're doing exactly the same thing that everybody else is doing, except not quite as big or good or well, that it's going to be any different. Okay, that's the first thing, okay? And that's a little snide. But, you know, ask what it is you're trying to do. What's your purpose here? And folks will say, well, things like, they'll say, well, are you saying we do nothing? And say, no, ask real questions. If you start with the question, how do I improve my convention center business? Then you are likely to end up with an answer that only involves the convention center. Okay? So in my judgment, that's the wrong question. If you want to ask a question, how do we bring more visitors to Kansas City? Then you've got to think seriously and ask the question about what it is that you have here that's attractive to people from elsewhere. What it is that you have here that is unique and valuable. You know, personally, you know, I honor Calvin Trillin. I can't come here, I haven't yet, it's on the plans for tomorrow. I can't come here without making a pilgrimage to Arthur Bryant's. Okay? And, you know, some related, because it's gate and all the, you know, but I have to do that because that to me is here. Okay? And the Jazz District and the city's history and the character of this place. You want to get visitors, then talk about the big question. Do you want to revitalize downtown? Then you've got to ask even bigger questions and think bigger, and don't take the pat, we call them silver bullet answers, that everybody else does. I can't tell you the number of people. Chambers of Commerce do this all the time. Birmingham, Alabama did a great one a few years ago. The Chamber does this trip. They go to Baltimore. How many of you have been to Baltimore? Seen the Inner Harbor? Inner Harbor's lovely. I like the Inner Harbor. I've been to meetings there. You go 4 blocks away, it's not pretty. That's right. And if you ask with the Inner Harbor and all the hotels and the brand new Hilton and Oriole Park, if you ask how is the convention center doing, you already saw the answer. So ask a bigger question, ask a thoughtful question, and we can come up with an answer that builds on the strength of this community that isn't the same answer that Chicago, Atlanta, Las Vegas, Orlando, Omaha, Des Moines, you know, they're building, they want to build. They need Chinese investor money to do it. They want to build a 600-room hotel next door to the Iowa Event Center in Des Moines because they're convinced that if they build that 600-room hotel, they will see a big boost in convention business in Des Moines. And do you know why they're convinced? Because Charlie did a study for them. And I'll show you that one too. Yes?
Did you fly into town?
Yes, I flew in yesterday. I don't want to say it. I can't say it. You know, no. But I understand that's in the works, but no. No. The word civic embarrassment comes to mind. Okay? I couldn't walk out the door where the super shuttle that the library paid for the super shuttle. Not a limo. I was disappointed. They paid for a blue super shuttle van. Okay? Hey. You know, and he was sitting, but I didn't know he was sitting because that door was closed. That door wouldn't have had a paper sign on it. I couldn't walk out, so I walked out further down, and he didn't know who the heck I was. Okay.
This gentleman here.
Yes.
So, in response to your presentation, Ronald Reagan was famous for saying, "Facts are stupid things." And that's what you see with the populace here in Kansas City. You can present them facts, and it just bounces right off. Right? They're going to approve it and approve it and approve it over and over.
Well, okay, and I'm sorry. people call me all kinds of peculiar things. But I'm a deep believer in the democratic process. And I believe, you know, there are ways to have some impact on public decisions. I'm not awfully sanguine about the outcome because I've seen what happens.
But you did have a question.
Yeah, I do have a question. Given all this research that you've done, has any politician ever came back to you and said, thank you for showing me the light. I didn't realize this. You convinced me we shouldn't be doing this. Has anyone anywhere in the country ever come back to you and said that?
They don't say it in those terms, but
They have come back.
yeah, I mean, there was a case in Tucson, Arizona, where a city council member invited me to come. Okay, and again, because my laptop isn't hooked up, I can't give you the fun stuff, but I'll show it to you on it before you leave. And I spoke to the city council. The mayor said, do you have 20 minutes? And I said, no, I have as much time as I need, thank you. I spoke to the city council. I don't think they were very happy to hear what I had to say. And I spoke about the work of, a little bit about the work of their consultants, and I did a breakfast meeting the next morning at a Mexican restaurant in Tucson. And not a lot of people were there. It was a pretty small group, maybe 30 people at the outside, including the local representative of the hotel developer, because they were talking about a 600-room hotel with publicly financed, but a private developer, Garfield Traub, was going to do it, and Garfield's local representative was there along with his lobbyist. And I did a presentation based on the consultant report for Tucson on this hotel. The consultant on the Tucson hotel was? No, one more. It was Tom Hasinski of HVS. Okay? And I ran through, just as you've seen, I like to just plot pieces right out of the consultant's reports in PDF form and let you see them. And I put up a slide that was the slide of the demand at the Tucson Convention Center. And somebody in the audience sat and looked at it and pointed and he said, look, 5 + 5 = 12. And that's exactly what it said in the report. And there was a reporter there from the Arizona Star, and he turned to the developer representative and he said, well, what do you make of that? I went, oh, well, there's a mistake somewhere and I can't explain it and obviously have to be investigated. Okay? And I left town that day and nothing happened. And a few days later, they wrote a story. The paper did a story on it. And the city manager turned up on a TV talk show the following week, and he said he had written a letter to the consultant to ask for, and I have a copy of the consultant's response. And it said, you can see it, it said, well, it was a table in Microsoft Word that was driven by an Excel spreadsheet, and of course it wasn't properly updated, but it has no bearing on our analysis or conclusions, etc. And the paper, the Arizona Star, did an editorial a couple of days later that said, why does it take a professor from Texas to ride into town to point out obvious mistakes in a report the city staff has had for months? Okay, which, frankly, is my question too. And lo and behold, not just for me, lo and behold, the council ended up nixing the hotel deal.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can we take a question over here from James Kemper, who I think is my cousin, who's the first person who ever opposed TIF in Kansas City.
Dr. Sanders, you're obviously a very well-informed person and you're a forward thinker. I noticed in the paper these days, as a former banker, that bankruptcy seems to be a very useful tool. What happens if these cities go bankrupt? I think Kansas City's a high candidate.
Well,
We have more debt per capita, I think, than any other city of our size in the country.
Right.
it can happen.
City bankruptcy we're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. Let me give you a two-part answer. I mean, part of it is, I'm not going to stand here because I don't know Kansas City's general fund finances well enough to tell you that it's a candidate anytime soon for Detroit. Okay.
That's nice.
That's not a very healthy place to be for a city.
But it's a very useful tool to take bankruptcy.
Well, it may come to that. I'm not gonna forecast that. What I can tell, let me tell you two things. As Crosby mentioned early on, tax increment finance, TIFs, is like a drug. Because once folks in the development community know you can do it, and you've done it, they won't do anything without it. It's very difficult for city officials to negotiate because they are pressed typically by local business leadership, by the local downtown organization, by the set of folks that are committed to downtown, their vision of downtown development, to keep doing these deals. Now, Wall Street and the bond market have, at least on these hotel things, have gotten smart, and by and large, these hotel deals require some level of public backing.
Thank you very much.
Okay? I understand at this point, this hotel deal does not. We'll see. These things have a habit of evolving and changing. But, you know, the Wall Street understands. Wall Street saw St. Louis. You know, I talked to the folks at Moody's. I've talked to the folks at Standard & Poor's. They know what happened. They downgrade these bond deals regularly, and they don't go close to them unless you are willing to put a serious financial commitment behind them. And there are cities that are. Cleveland's got a 600-room convention center hotel under construction because they know the world is ready to come to the brand new Cleveland Convention Center. Okay, next.
Take a question back here in the back.
Yes, sir. I was wondering, and I understand what you're saying about it being tied to the convention center and the convention meetings not increasing. Are you aware of any cases where there was a generalized need in the city, as witnessed here by the private money coming in? I know the Hamptons put in a hotel in the financial district. He mentioned a couple of new ones here, but where they were successful just because of a generalized need for room nights in the city? I mean, Kansas City, as recently as the Rolling Stones, was completely sold out all the way to St. Joe. When we had Skills USA, it used to happen quite a bit. I'm personally against this. But
Well, succeed. Some of the public hotels have done, the publicly financed hotels have done okay for now. There's one in Dallas that opened a couple of years ago. It's an Omni-branded hotel. They're managing reasonably. The Hyatt in Denver, where I have also stayed, is below the consultant forecasts from HBS.
Yeah.
But they're paying their debt without the citywide taxes that back them. The hotel market is a very peculiar thing. If you look at the national data, and I'm pleased to show you where you can get it, leisure demand is booming across the country. Business demand has come back up. Group demand, and we're talking about groups of 10 or more, has lagged for a long time. It's gotten better. Convention demand is still problematic. So what you will see, whether you're in Kansas City or San Antonio or Oklahoma City, but not necessarily Cleveland, but in Pittsburgh, is you'll see lots of, even in downtowns, mid-priced hotels being built. They're small 3, 4, 6-story hotels. They're often adaptive reuses of old office buildings. They're Marriott Courtyards. They're Hampton Inns. They're Hyatt Places. They're smaller. They're typically 100, 150 to 250 rooms. They are not 4-star full-service hotels. They have lower development costs. They have lower operating costs because they're not running a 24-hour room service operation. They can make money and be profitable with a very different segment. The problem is these whopping big convention center headquarters hotels. And what you will hear from the consultants and the local destination marketing organization that used to be called a CBB is, no, we need that big 600, 800, 1,000 room hotel to really compete. Okay? And those hotels, by and large, require some subsidy, if not full public ownership.
How about question over here? Go ahead.
This is completely different from anything that's been said so far. But one of the things that disturbs me the most about this proposal is the monopoly exclusive catering contract that they're offering to the convention center.
Yes.
The question is about the no-bid catering contract that Hyatt is going to get. One number that's been used is the $62 million value. Hyatt's putting $8.5 million in as part of the $50 million equity, but getting a $62 million, that's probably the revenue, contract from the city.
Did you have some more?
As a convention planner, I can tell you that you're not going to increase convention business, you're going to lose it. Because when I look at a hotel, convention center, the whole package, and I see an exclusive contract, I take my business elsewhere. Because monopolies, always, quality goes down and price goes up.
Okay. Let me address that in particular, okay? I saw, I think, a 6-pager. Someone shared with me a kind of 6-page memorandum of the cities on that catering contract. And it talked about the estimates of a consultant about the increases in catering business at the convention center that would happen, okay? I didn't see in that roughly 6-page thing, I didn't see any mention of the consultant's assumptions. I didn't see any documentation that I can recall, I may have missed it because it just looked quick, of the existing level of catering business and what it's been historically. Now, I did recognize the name of the consultant. It's not one I've mentioned before. It's a guy named Dave O'Neill. His firm is Conventional Wisdom Incorporated. Don't make this stuff up. I swear, I don't make it up. David's claim to fame is he was the first director of the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando. I met him once in Boston because I had done an analysis of the proposed Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. And the outfit that I had done that analysis for, the Pioneer Institute, had put on a debate at Northeastern University, and the representative of the other side was Dave O'Neill, because he had worked as part of the consulting team on the proposed Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. And he provided his perspective, and I provided mine. That was in the summer of 1997, that debate, okay? The consulting team that Dave O'Neill was part of was led by a fellow named Charlie Johnson. Charlie, I swear, Charlie forecast, I got a digital copy of the numbers. Charlie forecast the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center would do 794,000 annual hotel room nights of business. 794. How'd they do last year? 280. Now, to their credit, the former head of the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority said, well, Charlie thought there'd be a bunch of new hotels developed. And the convention center, instead of being the 600,000 square feet in the plan, was 516,000 square feet. So it was smaller. Full disclosure, 794,000 to 80. They did their peak year, I think about 350,000. But I'll show you the numbers if you want to see. Okay? You understand how I feel when Charlie's name enters a discussion? All right, please.
You and Charlie ever had a beer?
No, not a beer, but I've met him. I have met him. interact with him regularly, but we did meet at the International Economic Development Council, the Organization of Local Economic Development Staffers, used to put on an annual meeting they called the If You Build It, Will You Come? If you build it, will they come meeting. And they invited me to give a presentation 1 year. And the next year they invited me back. They canceled the invitation. They've never invited me back since, and they haven't had it in about the last 8 years. Yes?
Yes, my name is Ms. Morgan. Welcome to Kansas City.
Thank you.
I would like to know if we're going to have a basketball team. I'm hearing convention center, but are we going to have enough business for the convention center? And will that convention center or hotel be needed for the business that's?
You're asking my opinion, and let me be clear, it's my opinion. I won't venture to say anything about the NBA because, you know, there was a team that turned up in Oklahoma City about which they're very proud. So I'm going to leave it at that. There's a big issue going on in Milwaukee because the Bucks want a brand new arena, and it looks like Scott Walker wants to pay for a large chunk of that. But who knows? So maybe if the Bucks don't get their arena in Milwaukee, they'll feel like
Kansas City.
coming here. Now, if you want my opinion about the hotel, I had told you about the Denver hotel, the Denver Hyatt, and you had asked about other kinds of hotel demand. So let me tell you a little story that will illustrate some of what happens. Okay? If you ask my opinion, I don't think you're going to see a significant increase in your convention center business if you build that hotel. But I do know how Hyatt corporate works with hotels because I stay at lots of Hyatts. Okay? Have any of you heard of Priceline?
Yeah, sure.
Have any of you bid for blind bid for a hotel on Priceline? If you haven't, I'll take a few minutes to show you how to do it. Okay? But I know how to do it. And I know cities where they're big hotels. And I know how Hyatt works. If they have a big hotel, like in Denver, 1,100 room Hyatt at the convention center in Denver. If they've got a convention in town, they're going to sell those rooms to convention attendees for $200, $225 a night. Okay? But if there's not a convention in town, they're going to still try and sell those rooms. And they're going to sell those rooms for whatever they can. And so I stayed a few years ago. I'll show you the receipt. Really, it's not a problem. I stayed at that Denver Hyatt, the city-financed Hyatt, on Labor Day weekend, just for one night. We were on our way to Colorado Springs to stay at the Broadmoor. One night I stayed at that hotel in a room I got on Priceline.
For how much?
$66. Because if there's not a convention, that's what they do. $66.
And $45 for parking.
All right, well, there you go. Park on the street.
Yeah. It's a great story. We had a rental car. They ran out of rental cars. They promised one the next day. They picked up the cab back and forth to the Denver airport. The rental car company did. Yes. It was just, well, after a fashion, I had to go back and forth to that damn airport in the middle of nowhere. Pina's folly, but in any case.
Okay, I think we're going to do about 3 or 4 more questions. How, the gentleman at the back, all the way at the back?
You mentioned a sports team here, and I was going to ask a question, but then it just hit me when she asked that question. I was in St. Louis last week, and I loved your presentation on St. Louis. I was talking to my brother. He lives 2 blocks away from the Renaissance.
Is he on Washington?
He's 2 blocks from Washington.
Okay.
Loves it down there. They've got a lot of downtown things going on.
A whole lot of new.
We know what's going on in St. Louis with a new stadium by the
Right.
river, because they don't want to use the Edward Jones stuff.
Right.
Now, our conversation came up because he observed this stuff too. Said, there's actually talk that the convention business would actually do better
Well,
Now, is that a valid argument or not?
well, let's,
So like,
It's actually one of the reasons Sprint is relatively successful, because we didn't get a basketball team. They
Yeah,
tried very
yeah.
hard.
yeah, let me give you a two-part answer. Well, let me give you a two-part answer. They've got the Jones Dome lots of times, and you can see how their convention business looks. The dilemma of an attached dome stadium is the flat floor space, which is what you need for exhibit space. Okay, you know, you cover over the field, you put down something, you know. The flat floor space is about 150,000 square feet of space. So it's not a huge amount of space. And when you use that for exhibits, you put the little booths in there, they're kind of swallowed up by the cavernous 65, 70,000 seats. Meeting planners don't like that. There is, however, one set of groups that really do like that, and we had it in San Antonio just a couple of weeks ago because the Seventh-day Adventists came to town. And they had all their big general session events in our no sports team tenant Alamo Dome, okay, not connected, so they got to walk a circuitous route, but they had their general session events. For those kinds of big, we call them Smurf events, but those kinds of big social and religious events that have a lot of people in one big, for that a dome can be useful, okay? That, it can be useful there. Indianapolis has taken advantage of that, first with the RCA Dome, now with their new one, the Lucas Oil Stadium. It can work, but it's not a very good convention space. It doesn't pay off the way 150,000 square feet of real convention exhibit hall space would pay off.
I think our discussion got to that point and then decided, well, it's already there, so what
Oh yeah, I mean, it doesn't,
and it came up, well, that
right.
the convention business might actually increase because a little bit.
Opinion, a little bit.
I agree.
A little bit. St. Louis's convention competitive issues go beyond that, but yeah, maybe a little, but not a lot.
The lady over here?
Given the track record of the consultants, has there been any investigation about collusion between them and developers?
How about lawsuits?
Well, all I can do, honestly, is I'll show you what they said, and I'll show you what happened, okay? And I can't answer the question of exactly why or how or what goes on inside. In the book, there's a little mention, because at one point, in of all places, a hotel deal in Erie, Pennsylvania, a lawyer deposed Charlie Johnson. And I have the transcript of that deposition, and one of the things he asked, the lawyer asked, was, well, what's your scorecard? What's your track record? And the answer was, well, I don't keep a track record. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, I'll show you the exact language if you want. He said, you know, we're invited, we get a contract and we deliver a report, and if that's the end of it, we wish them well and we're gone. And we don't look back at the reports, and we don't see how close or far we came. And that's his statement. Opinion. I find that appalling. I mean, how can you make forecasts and then not look and see how you do? And Tom Hazinski from HVS was asked by city council members in Nashville about Raleigh and some of his other forecasts, and he said, well, that's proprietary information. You know, and I can't share that. And it's like, I'm sorry, geez, it's in Raleigh city budget every year. They've got the numbers in there. It doesn't take, there's nothing proprietary about them if you want to look. And I think in that review thing, he mentions that, well, maybe we ought to think about looking at how we do. I find it fascinating, okay? You know, collusion, I can't tell you. I just don't know.
So why don't we take this gentleman back here, and we'll do a couple more. We're not going to get to everybody, I apologize.
This is more a comment rather than a question. I want to thank Mr. Kemper for enlightening me about TIF. I didn't realize that every TIF dollar means less dollars for public
And that is the case.
libraries, for schools, for the blind. So it must take a very vicious man to steal from all of the things that are really needed. And on top of that, the only way you run a hotel is by paying people less than standard wages, less than a living wage. So our developer, Mr. Burke, must be a very vicious man to run his hotel on the backs of the poor people.
Well,
We did raise the minimum wage, but I wouldn't, I think it's wrong to call people names. I think, Mike thinks he's doing the right thing. He's going to build a hotel that will have a halo effect, is one of the phrases that they use. And I've known Mike for 35 years. I think he's a good man. It's just the wrong thing for Kansas City today.
This side is being omitted.
Okay, yes, sir. That's good. Thank you.
In 2009, Eleanor Ostrom won the Nobel Peace Prize in economics. And her thesis was that we're going through a phase right now of bigger is always better. And she's afraid that that phase will have to go to the place where so much has gone wrong until they change. And I kind of see that. I think maybe the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, is trying to kind of attack that a little bit. Until the needs of the regular people that live in your city are met, then you're going to continue to look for these pie-in-the-sky things that will solve all of our problems. And she recently died of pancreatic cancer. I'm sorry about that because I think she would have a lot to say to this phase we're going through in our economic system right now.
thank you.
My question is easy. Are you able to share with us who the consultants are for this project?
I mentioned Dave O'Neill because I've seen that. When Mayor Slay held the press conference 3 weeks or so ago, Sly James.
Slay is
St. Louis. I did that. I apologize. When Mayor James held the press conference, shortly thereafter, his press release, as I recall, linked to a website, Here to Stay KC, okay? And I think it's heretostay.kc.org. As I recall, have any of you seen that website? No. Has anyone here seen that website? No. You have. Steve, is it heretostay.kc.org? Okay. Take a look at that. That seems to be the official, am I mischaracterizing the official? Yeah, I couldn't find it today. What's that?
Uh-oh.
It's .com?
Itself?
Okay. If you take a look at it, it references in the FAQ portion, it references a consultant study on the hotel project. The consultant was HVS. I haven't seen an HVS report. You have a professional interest in this. Has the city released an HVS report? Why would the city not release a consultant report that bears on that hotel? And I don't understand that. Well, now again, this is commentary from me. If the city is going to put up a website that says, we need to do this hotel, this is a great thing for Kansas City, and it references a consultant study, then I think the citizens of Kansas City should have that consultant study fully available to them. I mean, that's how I think the public's business ought to happen. What's that? Well, and if they have that, if they make that report available, I'll take a look at it, and I'm pleased to share my reactions to it. But I find it fascinating, if not appalling, that they're saying, "Hey, we know this thing will work because we've got this consultant study, which you apparently cannot see."
And Courtney, do we have the stuff that we did up? I believe in this stuff is something that Mike Burke sent out that includes, I believe, a commentary by the HVS guys, right, on Haywood's work. And so you can see the opposition. And one thing I tell you to do is they've got a graph. They've got 4 graphs, actually, in it. Look at the difference between the blue lines, which is the actual business of conventions over the last 10 or 15 years, the kind of numbers that Haywood showed you, and the red line, which is their projections. Just look at the differences and keep in mind what you've heard. Sorry?
And then a miracle
And then a miracle happened,
Do you
exactly.
want to accommodate
Yeah,
that?
how about this lady right here?
No,
Oh, sorry.
do the fellow back there,
Okay.
and I'll do one more. And
Yeah, we'll do a couple more, yeah.
okay.
Mayor James maintains there's no taxpayer exposure on this, and I had heard that the catering contract, part of the deal may expose the taxpayers in ways that, I'd like to learn more about.
That's not clear. The Star wrote an interesting article about the caterer contracts, the one they went into depth on, and it is not clear, I think, and I think that's the Star article made clear that the city's not created a contract yet, and it's not clear what they're on the hook for in the contract. So you're right. The number that's been used is 62 million for the contract. We know there are 12 caterers today who can use Bartle, and they will all be eliminated. They're not happy about it, needless to say. And so, yeah, it's a great question, but I don't think there's a good answer to it yet. We haven't seen a contract.
Keep going.
John, you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Roy. My question is a little bit contingent upon our new council. And I know we have one member here. My question is this. Given the repercussions, the severe repercussions that this may cause to our schools, our public libraries, our parks, our roads, our streets, do you think it's fair, just right, that the council and mayor are trying to ramrod this thing here before you guys have to sit down and have to deal with this? Is that fair, right, or just? No. Any of the council members here can talk just quickly? Sorry.
Well, I would talk about it, and
Catherine Shields,
I think.
future councilwoman.
Future councilman. And I think I made it very clear at City Hall, when I talked to people, that I felt this should be slowed down, and we ought to have a chance to look at. And clearly, that is not happening. It's my understanding it's going to be voted on tomorrow, done as an emergency, so that then I think there's only 5 days to reconsider, and of course, we all won't be sworn in within 5 days. On the catering contract, I've read that 5 or 6 pages too, which I have to tell you, during the election, it became very clear that the returning council people had not, the ones running for re-election had not read it.
Read it, yeah.
Which I found, 6 pages. But in it, I think it's pretty clear. It says we're going to pay $2.5 million a year, growing to $5.5 million.
Right.
That's going to come out of the catering revenue, but it does say in there, or any other legal sources. Well, what are the other legal sources?
Right.
The general fund.
Right. And you add that up over 15 years, and you can tell that Hyatt's equity investment is riskless equity investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. So maybe, we've got a question back here?
Yeah, this might be a little
Take maybe 2 minutes.
simplistic, but it seems to me from your slides, and it seems to make sense that the health of the number of attendees track the health of the stock market, right?
Oh yeah, it's clearly with one caveat. It hasn't. After 2008, the recovery has really lagged. Really lagged. And if I don't use those national numbers, demand side numbers from the industry, and I use real center performance from big centers around the country, no, it strikes me, my conclusion is that we are in a very different world now. You know, last year was 2014. I update these numbers almost daily for as many places as I can. Things have not come back. In real center attendance, things have not come back to where they were in 2006 and 7. And that there's something has changed there very dramatically. One other thing I would add, I try to track the attendance of lots of different kinds of groups. Steve, we were talking about the American Library Association last night. The example I did recently for somebody is still in my brain. I can track it for the American Dental Association. In the mid-90s meeting in Las Vegas, the annual ADA meeting had 55,000 attendees. By the mid-2000s, it had shrunk to about 45,000 in Las Vegas. Last year, last year they met in San Antonio. 20,617. Okay? Okay? Now that's dentists. Okay? That's not everybody. It's not the world. It's dentists. But that tells me there's something larger that has changed.
Technology has changed.
Yeah, and I think the world's changed.
It's after 8, so I think we need to close. And I want to mention one number. This is Bill Lucas's number, but I think it's correct. And I can't remember who he was talking to, Steve Rockrod or the Star or whomever. But he pointed out if you do the numbers on the TIF proposal, we have to increase our room nights to make this successful in the numbers that the TIF proposal and the but-for proposal, the city's proposals, the developers' proposals. We have to increase our room nights about 200,000 or roughly 70% increase over where we are today. And after you've seen what Haywood has shown us, if you want to talk later at the bar about the likelihood of that, I'd be happy to buy you a drink. I think tonight, the last thing I want to say is I think tonight you've heard, and you can come out with any conclusion you want, and we'll have some more discussion tomorrow morning with a breakfast here at 7:30 a.m., and I hope some city council members, Jan Markison has promised to come. I think what you've heard here tonight is more information about the convention center business than you've heard in Kansas City in the last few years, and that's what the public library should do, and I thank you for being here.
Is that okay? All right.